Your Honor, we are demanding immediate control of the estate because the respondent is a thief. She did not care for him, she held him hostage. My sister's lawyer pointed a finger straight at my face. She is a glorified nursemaid who manipulated a dying man. He cannot be trusted with $5, let alone $8 million. My sister Olivia let out a sob that sounded expensive. She stole our last years with him, she cried. The judge looked at me. Ms. Vale, do you object? I did not stand up. I just checked my watch. Not yet, I said. I am just waiting for the gatekeeper. The heavy oak doors were pushed open with the tired efficiency of a man who spent his life in archives. A stranger walked in. He was not wearing the kind of Italian silk suit Olivia's lawyer wore. He was wearing a gray off-the-rack number that was a size too big in the shoulders, and he carried a briefcase that looked like it had survived a war zone. He did not look at the gallery. He did not look at my parents, Mark and Deborah, who were craning their necks like curious vultures. He walked straight to the clerk's desk, placed a thick, sealed envelope on the wood and turned to the judge. Your Honor, he said, his voice dry as dust. I am representing the Trust Department of Hawthorne National Bank. We are the successor trustee for the estate in question. The air in the courtroom changed instantly. It went from the sticky, emotional heat of a family feud to the absolute zero of corporate finance. Olivia's lawyer stood up, his expensive chair scraping loudly against the floor. Objection. We have not been notified of any corporate trustee. This is a probate matter. Sit down, counsel, the judge said, not even looking up. He was already slicing open the envelope. The sound of tearing paper was the only noise in the room. I watched my mother's hands clasped together in her lap, her knuckles turning white. She looked at me, confusion warring with anger in her eyes. She wanted to know why I was not panicking. She wanted to see the fear she had planted in me since I was 14. But I was not afraid. I was the one who had driven Grandpa to the bank 3 years ago. I was the one who sat in the lobby while he signed the papers. I knew exactly what was in that envelope. The judge pulled out a document, scanning the header. Then he peered over his spectacles at Olivia. Miss Vale, the judge asked. Are you aware that your grandfather's assets were placed into an irrevocable trust prior to his death? He was confused, Olivia blurted out, her voice shrill. He did not know what he was doing. That is why we are here. The certification of trust says otherwise, the judge replied calmly. He turned a page. And it contains a very specific provision regarding legal challenges. He cleared his throat and read aloud. Article 9, Section C, the No Contest Clause. Any beneficiary who seeks to obtain an adjudication in any proceeding attacking the validity of this trust, or who challenges the competency of the grantor, shall immediately forfeit any and all interest in the trust estate, treating said beneficiary as if they had predeceased the grantor without issue. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. I looked at my father. Mark's mouth hung slightly open. He was a man who prided himself on intimidation. He bullied waiters. He bullied contractors. He bullied me. But he was staring at the man in the cheap suit with pure, unadulterated dread. You cannot bully a bank. You cannot gaslight a contract. Olivia's lawyer looked like he had just swallowed a lemon. He knew exactly what had just happened. By filing that emergency petition claiming Grandpa was incompetent and the estate was at risk, they had not just started a fight. They had pulled the pin on a grenade they were holding. Your Honor, the lawyer stammered, sweating now. We withdraw the motion. We were acting on incomplete information. The motion is already filed and entered into the record, the judge said, closing the folder. The trust is active. The trustee is present. The assets are secure. Your request for emergency control is denied. My mother let out a sharp gasp, grabbing my father's arm. Olivia turned to me, her eyes wide and wet with panic. You knew, she hissed, loud enough for the bailiff to step forward. You let us do this. I looked her dead in the eye. I told you to wait. They thought they were fighting a helpless sister. They forgot that for the last decade, my job has been managing the lives of people far more powerful and ruthless than them. I did not need to scream. I just needed to let them sign their names on the dotted line. The trap had snapped shut. And they were the ones who set the bait. The courtroom buzzed with the low, frantic energy of a hive kicked over. Olivia's lawyer was leaning over the table, whispering furiously to my parents. My mother, Deborah, looked like she was trying to shrink inside her morning coat. My father, Mark, just stared at the empty space where his millions used to be, his face a mask of sweating, red-faced disbelief. They looked terrified. For the first time in my life they looked small. I leaned back in the hard wooden chair and watched them unravel. It was fascinating, really. Like watching a building collapse in slow motion. You see the cracks before you hear the sound. And as I watched Mark wipe a line of sweat from his upper lip, the memory hit me. Hard. It was not a courtroom. It was a kitchen. 15 years ago. The air smelled like stale scotch and impending doom. I was 14. My jaw was swollen, throbbing with a dull, rusty ache. I had just come home from emergency dental surgery. My bite had been misaligned, grinding my molars to dust, causing migraines that made me black out. The surgery cost $12,000. That same week, my parents' construction business filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They sat me down at the table. My mother was crying, the same performative, jagged sobs she was using right now in court. My father was pacing, a glass of amber liquid splashing over his knuckles. We lost it all, Mark had roared, slamming his hand on the table. The house. The trucks. The contracts. Gone. He pointed a shaking finger at my swollen face. Because of you. If we had not spent that capital on her teeth, he told my mother, ignoring me like I was a piece of furniture, we could have floated the loan. We could have survived the quarter. He drained us, Dip. She bled us dry. I believed him. God, I believed him. I sat there, 14 years old, mouth full of cotton gauze, and accepted the weight of their failure. I took it onto my narrow shoulders. I internalized the idea that I was the money pit. The bad luck charm. The reason they went from country clubs to rentals. They told that story to everyone. Thanksgiving. At Christmas. We would still be in the big house if Caitlin had not needed that surgery. It became family lore. A convenient, jagged rock they could throw at me whenever they needed a scapegoat for their own incompetence. Then Olivia came along. Born 3 years after the crash, right when Dad scammed his way into a new loan. She was the phoenix. The fresh start. She was untainted by their failure. He got the dance lessons. He got the private tutors. He got the love. I got the bill. I spent my 20s paying a debt that did not exist. I paid their rent when Mark forgot to save for taxes. I bought their groceries when Deborah spent the food budget on a networking lunch. I thought if I paid enough, if I bled enough, eventually the ledger would balance. Eventually they would forgive me for existing. It was not until I started working for my boss, a man who actually understood how money works, that I ran the numbers. $12,000 does not bankrupt a multimillion-dollar company. Fraud does. Embezzlement does. Spending operating capital on vacations does. They did not lose the business because of my teeth. They lost it because they were greedy, stupid, and arrogant. But a narcissist cannot look in the mirror. They cannot hold their own shame. They need a trash can. I was the trash can. I looked across the aisle at them now. Mark caught my eye. For a second his expression shifted. He looked at me the way he used to look when he needed rent money, expectant, demanding, assuming I would fix it because I owed him. He thought I was still that 14-year-old girl with the swollen jaw, desperate to be forgiven. He opened his mouth, probably to mouth the word, fix this. I held his gaze. I did not blink. I let the silence stretch between us, cold and heavy as a tombstone. You blamed me for your bankruptcy, I thought. You made me carry your shame for 15 years. You called me a burden while I kept a roof over your head. You wanted a burden? You just found one. The ledger was closed. And I was not paying the balance this time. Olivia went still. The kind of stillness that happens right before a glass shatters. The judge had just told her that by filing this motion, she had effectively written herself out of the will. $8 million was evaporating in front of her eyes. I watched the realization hit her. It was not grief. It was the terrifying math of a lifestyle she could no longer afford. She stood up. Her hands gripped the table until her knuckles turned white. Then the tears came. Instant, flooding, racking sobs. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. He was not in his right mind, she wailed, turning to the gallery, then the judge. He made him do this. He brainwashed him. The judge frowned. Miss Vale, those are serious allegations. It is the truth. Olivia pointed a shaking finger at me. She isolated him. She cut the phone lines. He changed the locks. For 3 years we tried to see him and she treated him like a prisoner. That trust is not his will. It is hers. It was the nuclear option. Elder abuse. Undue influence. The magic words that freeze probate courts and launch investigations. My father, Mark, saw his opening. He jumped up, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. It is true, Your Honor, Mark boomed, his voice thick with righteous indignation. She physically barred us from the property. Last Christmas Eve. We went there to give my father his presents. We stood on the porch in the freezing cold, begging to see him. She locked the door and laughed at us. She would not let a son see his dying father on Christmas. The gallery murmured. The judge looked at me, his expression darkening. It was a damnable story. A cruel daughter keeping a loving family away from a dying man on a holy night. Kept my face blank. I sat perfectly still. But in my head I was back in that hallway. December 24th. 11:30 p.m. Grandpa was in the hospital bed in the living room. He was on high-flow oxygen, his lungs failing, his anxiety spiking every time a car drove past. I was measuring his morphine dose when the pounding started. It was not a knock. It was a fist hammering against the wood. I crept to the peephole. Mark and Deborah were there. They were wearing Santa hats and holding half-empty wine glasses. They were stumbling. They were not there to visit. They were there because they had left a party early and wanted to perform a family moment for their Instagram stories. "Open up, you little leech," Mark had screamed through the wood. "We know he is in there." Grandpa had gripped my wrist, his eyes wide with terror. "Do not let them in," he wheezed, his oxygen monitor beeping an alarm. "Please, Katie. I do not want them to see me like this. Do not let them in." I checked the deadbolt. I turned off the porch light. I sat on the floor by his bed and held his hand until the pounding stopped and their car peeled out of the driveway. That was their loving visit. A drunken raid in the middle of the night that nearly gave a dying man a heart attack. But in Mark's mind he was the victim. He believed his own lie. He genuinely remembered it as a rejection, not an assault. That is the thing about narcissists, they rewrite history to make themselves the hero of every tragedy. "Your Honor," Olivia's lawyer said, seizing the momentum. "If the decedent was isolated and coerced, the trust is invalid. We move to suspend the trustee's authority pending an investigation into elder abuse." The judge looked at me. "Ms. Vale, do you have a response to these claims?" My palms were sweating, but I kept my hands folded on the table. This was the moment. If I argued, it was my word against theirs. If I screamed, I looked unstable. I needed them to commit. I needed them to put it on the record under oath. I looked at the trustee. I gave him a single small nod. I stayed silent. "Counsel," the judge said, turning to the man in the cheap suit. "Does the trustee have any evidence regarding these allegations of isolation? Was the decedent prevented from communicating with his family?" The trustee did not rush. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a heavy leather-bound book. It was battered, the spine cracked from use. It was Grandpa's journal. "We do, Your Honor," the trustee said. "But it does not show that Ms. Vale isolated the decedent. It shows that the petitioners abandoned him." He walked to the clerk's desk and placed the journal on top of a stack of papers. "I am marking this as Exhibit B, the decedent's personal log, colloquially referred to as the rejection ledger. And I am pairing it with Exhibit C, 5 years of itemized AT&T cellular records for the account registered to the decedent." Olivia stopped crying. The sudden silence from her end of the table was more telling than her sobs had been. He stared at that book like it was a bomb. "State your case," the judge ordered. The trustee opened the book to a marked page. Entry dated March 12th. The petitioner Olivia Vale's birthday. He read Grandpa's handwriting, his voice void of emotion. "Called Liv to sing happy birthday. Sent to voicemail. No call back." Then he picked up the phone bill. AT&T record for March 12th. Outgoing call to the number ending in 4492. Duration for seconds. No incoming calls from that number for the remainder of the month. My mother winced. Olivia looked down at her hands. The trustee turned the page. Entry dated June 19th. Father's Day. He read from the journal. Waited for Mark. He said he would stop by after golf. Never showed. Caitlin made steak. He held up the phone bill. No incoming calls from Mark Vale on that date. One outgoing text from the decedent at 8 p.m. asking, "Are you coming?" No reply. It was a massacre. A slow, methodical dismantling of their entire reality. Every time they claimed they were busy, Grandpa had written it down. Every time they promised to visit and ghosted him, he documented it. The ledger was a timeline of their selfishness, written in the shaky hand of a man who just wanted to see his family. Mark's face was turning purple. "This is private," he sputtered. "You cannot read a dead man's diary. It is evidence of state of mind," the judge said coldly. "Sit down." The trustee flipped to the final marker. Entry dated December 24th. Christmas Eve. The room went deadly still. This was the night Mark had just testified about. The night he claimed I barred him from the house. The trustee read from the ledger. 11:45 p.m. Mark and Deborah arrived drunk, pounding on the door and shouting. It scared the decedent. His heart rate hit 160. Caitlin kept the door locked and he didn't want them to see him like that. He set the book down. AT&T records showed a 911 call at 11:48 p.m., initiated by the decedent but ended before connecting when the knocking stopped. In that moment, the loving son's story collapsed. The court didn't see victims. They saw a drunk man tormenting his dying father on Christmas. Mark shrank in his chair, exposed. The trustee summarized. Caitlin didn't isolate him. He protected him. Olivia's lawyer glanced at the evidence, then asked for a recess. Denied, the judge said. You made the accusation. You opened the door. Now we walk through it. He turned to me. Olivia claims Grandpa was incompetent when he signed the trust. Did I have a response? I nodded. It was time. Yes, Your Honor. I didn't just care for him, I managed him. And I knew this day would come. The lawyer lunged with objections. He was 89 on heavy pain meds, paranoid. A scribbled notebook isn't proof. It's decline. Olivia piled on. He mixed up names. Caitlin put a pen in his hand. The judge asked the trustee if the bank had capacity evidence. The trustee looked at me. My cue. I didn't tell him where to sign, I said. I managed his schedule. I managed his estate. And I knew the second he died you'd come for the money and call him crazy. I faced the judge. The morning the trust was amended, I scheduled 2 appointments before the bank. The trustee produced the file. Exhibit D, an affidavit of capacity signed by 2 forensic psychiatrists, completed 2 hours before the signing. Both found him oriented, lucid, and fully aware of his finances and family dynamics. The sessions were video recorded and the files were submitted to the court. In the recording, he plainly states he's protecting his legacy from Olivia's spending plans. Olivia went pale and screamed. Those doctors cost $5,000 a day. I couldn't afford them. I didn't pay them, I said calmly. I scheduled them. The trustee held up 2 canceled checks, paid from the decedent's account, signed by him, memo line, capacity exam, cleared 3 months ago. Silence. The judge's voice dropped. Olivia's side had just sworn he was incompetent, yet the court now had video and expert testimony proving lucidity. That is perjury, the judge said. And since this petition sought to seize assets based on that lie, it's also attempted fraud. He dismissed the petition with prejudice, ordered a sanctions hearing, and ruled the no contest clause triggered. Olivia left with nothing. The gavel fell. Outside in the parking lot, my family looked wrecked beside their leased Mercedes. Mark tried to bargain. Appeals, family splitting the money. I stared at him and repeated his words back. Taken care of? Like when you put utilities in my name and ruined my credit. He pleaded about debts and losing the house. You were finished 15 years ago, I said. You just used me to keep the lights on. Olivia lunged and grabbed my arm. I didn't flinch. Let go, or I call the trustee and add assault to the list. I unlocked my car. My mother wailed that they had nothing. I started the engine and looked my father in the eye. You're right, Dad. You have nothing. But at least you don't have a burden anymore. I drove away. 3 weeks later, the trustee called. The transfer was complete. Liquid assets deposited, deeds recorded. The court entered the final order. Olivia was hit with $150,000 in legal fees and was heading for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. During discovery, auditors found discrepancies in my parents' business debt story. An IRS audit was underway. In Grandpa's quiet study, the battered leather ledger sat on the desk. The book that saved me. I read the last entry. He saw the truth, knew I was the only one who paid my dues, and wanted to protect me from the people who only saw a bank account. Then I opened my contacts. Dad. Olivia. I didn't block them. I hit delete. One by one. They weren't family anymore. Just strangers who used to know a girl who paid their rent. And this time when they came knocking, I didn't open the gate.